Okay, let's talk about getting assets in here and setting up Max a bit. So something to note, Unreal Engine works in centimeters. That means everything we're going to work on will be in centimeters. If you do not work in centimeters in Max or whatever DCC application you're using, that's Digital Content Creator, okay, um, you're going to have a headache and none of your work is useful because it simply won't be usable in the grander project. If it's not useful in the grander project, it's basically a zero again. So they must be the right size. I will simply not grade your work if you're not working to proper scales. So let's kick over to Max here and I'll show you where we're going to set things up in Max. I'm going to be working with this piece of wood and we're going to describe some of the issues and things you're going to run into. If I select the piece of wood, you'll notice that it's actually about 5 feet long. It's about an inch thick, width, and height. Height. It's a little bit thinner than that. It's almost an inch, and then 1.1 foot wide or whatever. 1.1 feet wide or whatever, 1.2. So 1 foot 2 inches. Anyways, that's what this board is. That's what that's about. Well, how did I get there? So we go to customize unit setup, okay? And in unit setup, we can set up the unit scales that we're going to be working with. What you're looking at here, as it states right there in the title, this is a display unit scale. This is only what you're seeing here. It isn't what Max is thinking in the background. You must click on System Unit Setup first. So under System Unit Setup, this is going to tell Max what unit scale it's working in. Now, by default, it's going to be set to inches. We don't want that. We want it to be centimeters so that we're aligned with how Unreal Engine thinks about unit scales, okay? So we're going to set it to centimeters and we're going to say, okay. Here you can change this at will. Okay, it doesn't matter what this is. You could work in centimeters if you're used to working in centimeters. You can work in generic units and just type in just numbers, a bunch of numbers. When I'm looking at a piece of wood, I'm using the U.S. standard foot fractional inch because everything in Canada follows that still. You go buy a 2x4, it's a 2x4. Well, actually, it's not. It's 1.5 by 3.5 inches, believe it or not. But if it says it's 8 feet long, it's 8 feet long. Just really confusing if you don't know the pain I have to deal with when I'm building stuff. So if I'm working with this, I'm going to see foot inch here, and I wanted a piece of wood that's about 5 feet long. I wanted it just over a foot wide, and I wanted it about an inch thick or whatever, right? So that's getting me this board that I built. So I started with a box with this. Notice how low polygon count it is. I kind of broke up the angles a little bit, just moved it around a bit. I could probably even reduce the poly count more by welding some more verts in here. Not necessary, that necessary, but you can see I broke up the ends a little bit and thinned it out. It took me seconds. I didn't go and sculpt this in ZBrush. I didn't do anything fancy. You're going to see in my further videos when this thing's textured, it looks like a piece of wood. If you've seen the images of the game level that I created in Unreal Engine or attended my week 8 last year, I guess it was, in 2019, all of those assets that are wood were built from this. Okay, so super simple. I called it plank, all right, in this case. Now we're going to export this and we're going to create an error and we're going to come back and have to fix that error, but you'll see where that comes from. Under File, Export. Use the game exporter. It's easier. You can use the regular exporter. Game exporter just gives you a dialog that you can leave up on the screen. This isn't modal, so it doesn't have to be closed every single time you export something. You can set it up and leave it. I'm also going to provide you, once I find the time, a script I created that makes it even easier to export stuff. So we're going to be exporting a model. So I've just got model D4 picked here. We're going to say export all. Bad idea. Very, very bad idea. I'm going to build all of my assets in one 3ds Max project file. I am not going to create new Max files for every asset. Use one file. If you look, you can see all this stuff is currently in here. Okay. So I've got a water tower in here somewhere. I've got things like, what else? My entire elevator system is in here. And what's nice is the elevator system, for instance, and the water tower are built from this piece of wood and other bits of pieces of wood. and other elements that I've saved that I can just quickly kit bash together pieces to build a new asset if I need it. Some of those assets are going to be kit bashed together in Unreal because it's actually going to be faster. So with my wood plank selected, I'm going to make sure export all is off, or else you're going to have one hell of a mess. Make sure it turns it off. That's something my script does. It does selection by default. So I'm going to go over to selection. We want the smoothing groups on. That tells Max that any of the smoothing groups that have been set that make it look smooth and not all faceted are going to be exported. Let's see what else needs on. You can, funnily enough, you can leave the coordinate systems alone, but Max is set up and so is Unreal Engine. But if you just want your own sanity, you can say up axis Z. What it'll do is it'll flip it over on the export if you leave it on Y, and Unreal Engine sees that and flips it back. So I always have it just set to Z, whatever. Let's see. Tangents and binormals I find help sometimes. Turbo smooth, we never want to turbo smooth anything. We need nice low res meshes. Okay, we're making game levels. We're not making feature film assets. Okay, so very, very simple. So realistically, that setup should work. We're going to pick a directory to export to. So as I've shown in my other video, we're working to a specific folder system. So my ANM 203 working assets, I'm going to make a folder in here and we're going to call this exports. And in here, I'm going to put in my plank and directory. We don't need a directory. This is the directory. I'm going to choose that. There's the directory and then the file name. Plank, let's say, which is also going to create us a problem because it's an incorrect naming convention. But I'm going to show you how we can sort that out in Unreal as well. So I'm going to say export this, and it's going to export this item out, and it's going to be exported successfully. You can leave this up if you got dual monitors, kick it over the other monitor. What's nice is my game export actually can be docked into these, and I hope to get that to you real soon. So back over to Unreal Engine. And then we need to know where to put it. Well, a static mesh is what we've just created. A static mesh is just that. It's a mesh and it's static. It doesn't move. It's not a character, for instance, not something that's animated. So it's a static mesh. I'm going to go to the folder I created called wood, and we're going to import into the wood folder. We can also right click and you can say import if you like from there. So once we're in there, I'm going to go just kick back out of the game folder system and into working assets, into export. And you can see that I've got my plank FBX and I'm going to import that. It's then going to bring up a dialog box for you to check off. I think I've shown some of this in the game doc. We don't want a skeletal mesh. That's things like, again, a character rig and everything. Auto-generate collisions. We want to leave that on. So we want to be able to collide with the object, but we don't want to be colliding with the object. We want to collide with this low, super, super low res item around it. Like a box. For instance, often in games, you'll find yourself standing in places where you don't think you should be able to stand. That's because you're standing on a collision object, not the actual object. If we were bringing in multiple meshes that we'd exported all at once, you could actually use combined meshes if you wanted them to be all one piece. But I'm not going to do that for the most part. I'm going to leave them as their separate entities so that I can build larger pieces together in Unreal Engine. Okay, so everything else I believe should be left on. Import translation, import uniform scale. Everything should be left on there. Convert unit scale. If you want, you can turn that on. It'll try and make sure that things are converted properly for scale. You should be working in the correct scale to begin with and building everything to scale, so it shouldn't matter. I'm going to click on import. So now that it's been imported, you can see it's brought in two things, the plank itself and the material. Now, actually, I don't want the material, so it was good that I actually made that error. Let's make sure we turn that off. We don't want to bring in the max materials. We want to build them ourselves because we're going to try and build generic materials that we can reuse again instead of having unique materials on every single asset. This is a good working habit. If you're using unique materials on every single asset, the amount of data in your game goes up and up and up and up with every single asset, okay, larger than it should be. Instead, we're going to make materials that can be reused. So I'm just going to delete these and we're just going to re-import again so that you see the correct setting. It should retain the settings that we had, except we want to turn off the materials. See if they've moved it. No, they haven't. So here's the settings here. Create a new materials. Do not create materials. I think what we're looking for. So we don't want to bring those in. We don't want to import any textures on it. We're going to do that separately, and we're going to build up a library separately. So we don't want any of this material stuff coming in. So I want to say import again. And now what we get is we get this plank come in, and we can work with that plank. So I'm going to drag that out into the scene. And what you'll notice is a bit of a problem, okay? And that problem is that the pivot is way off to one side. You don't want this. Don't leave them like this. This would be the biggest nightmare ever to be working with this element with this pivot off to one side like this. Once again, I'm just going to delete that out of the scene, delete my plank, and I'm going to head back to 3ds Max. So the reason for this is simple. It's a little odd the way it works, but you'll notice that the pivot of the object is in the correct place here. It's where I want it, right in the middle of the object, so I can move things around nicely. I might even want to make sure I center it, so I could go to the hierarchy panel and pivot and affect pivot only, and I could say center to object if I wanted, so it's in the center of the object. Um, but the problem is that it's not at the origin over here. For whatever reason, when Unreal reads this, it reads the offset and sets the pivot over to the side here. So what we're going to want to do is make sure that we zero everything out. So you can do it one of two ways. You can hit F12 and bring in your moved transform, your type in transforms, and just right click on everything and zero it out. Or of course, now at the bottom down here, you can zero them out by right clicking on all the spinners. So that's now in the correct place. I can come back to my game exporter again. I don't need to change anything. It's already set up. File exists. Yeah, replace it. Head back over to Unreal Engine. Okay, and re-import it. Now, what's nice is I didn't actually have to delete it, but I figured I'd just show you that you can do it both ways. So if you have the plank and we come back in, we can say import. You can see the pivot's in the correct place now. Let's just try that again. Let's go back. Let's make a mess of that again. I'm just going to kick it over to the side here. I'm going to export it. And this time, let's do a re-import. So with this asset, I can right click on it and say re-import. And notice how it just offset itself in the file. So it's just gone about, moving itself over into the new location effectively. So we can go back and fix that real fast. If it's in the wrong place, no problem. Just grab it again, go to Move Tool. Let's just center it. Just re-export that piece again. And then once again, we're just going to re-import that. Right click, re-import, and it snaps to the right spot. Okay. So this is very handy to be able to re-import and update things, which means we could bring in just a box initially that's about the right size and start building with it, and then just simply re-import the asset, and it'll update everything in the scene that's using that asset, because I can drag this in as many times as I want. In fact, I could even hold down Alt and copy and paste it out and make as many as I want in here. And as soon as this one gets updated, it updates all of them in the entire level, which is very, very, very handy. So we're going to be able to bring everything in that way. Something I promised was to show you how to change the pan so it's the right way around. I'll do that right now. Under Edit, under Editor Preferences, search for Invert, and look for invert middle mouse pan. And as soon as that's on, now your pan alt middle mouse button will be the right way around instead of backwards for some crazy reason. And there you go. You've brought in your first asset.